Hi, welcome to Purposeful Lab, a production of Franciscan University. I am Dr. Dan Keebler, your host, and this is the second season that Purposeful Lab has been hosted by Franciscan University. On this season, we're going to be looking at the topic of transhumanism. So we're going to have a number of episodes. This will be our first episode on the topic, and we're going to be looking at how humans interact with technology and how technology might alter humans in the future. So we'll look at sort of genetic engineering. We'll look at AI, mind-brain interfaces. We'll look at just the nature of how technology changes us. But here in the first episode, my guest is Dr. Michael Deem, who is a graduate of Franciscan University, graduated back early 2000s with a degree in philosophy and theology, degree, double major. Ended up getting a couple master's degrees and then get his PhD in philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. And now is currently an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh in the School of Public Health. But he also has bunch of other appointments. I think you're in the Center for Philosophy of Science, bioethics appointments, genetics and bioethics appointments. And you're also a deacon, deacon as well. So, Dr. Dean, Michael, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun, I think. Yeah.
That's great. So, to get started, maybe we were talking a little bit before we started filming about sort of your academic journey. So what got you interested in Franciscan? What got you here? Because you didn't start out thinking you were going to be in philosophy and theology when you went to college, right?
Yeah, I was one of those high schoolers that lacked a lot of direction. And I had a number of friends who had committed themselves to studying and getting good grades. I was a rather mediocre student in high school. But the friends that I ended up really aligning with, they were all going to these engineering and computer science programs. And my very best friend wanted to go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is a technology, engineering, architecture school. And I kind of on a lark applied there. And I thought, well, what do I study? Well, just put down my major with what my friend was doing, engineering. So I was miraculously accepted at Cal Poly for engineering. And it was really interesting. I love math and science. I still do to this day. I married a chemical engineer. My wife was a chemical engineer for 10 years in the oil business. But part of the general education requirement at Cal Poly, surprisingly, and this is certainly a rarity, I think, these days, at a public state university, was 2 philosophy courses for every undergraduate, irrespective of major.
That is unusual.
It is. And so I begrudgingly registered for the sort of catch-all general ed intro to philosophy class. And I had a professor there, Dr. Paul Miklowitz, who I credit with sort of setting me on the trajectory into philosophy and my career. I give him the credit for that. He pulled no punches, and he thought, let's not read intro textbooks. Let's not just listen to me lecture. Let's have students all over the campus read the great philosophers. So we did Plato, Descartes, and Kant in that class. And I confess, I was lost for most of it, but it was absolutely fascinating, especially Plato. We read the Symposium. And so it was Plato's reflection on what is love. And I was hooked. So I, right away the next semester, took the next required philosophy class for the gen ed, which was an intro to political philosophy. We read Plato's Republic, as I recall. I think we read some Hobbes. But I was hooked. And much to the chagrin of my parents, I switched my major to philosophy. It was right around this time as well that I was rediscovering my Catholic faith from my youth. I had been raised Catholic. But when we moved to California when I was 13, we started attending Mass irregularly. And so religion was not a strong emphasis in our home. And I began to ask the big questions. And eventually, through reading of scripture, beginning to pray, worked my way back into the Catholic Church, not escape it. And so I started watching EWTN, and there were 2 programs on EWTN that hooked me. One was Franciscan University Presents. So this was some of the figures are still on there today, but Father Michael Scanlon was the host. I think Dr. Scott Hahn was on there, Dr. Regis Martin. And I would watch that and just thought, wow, how invigorating it is to just be able to sit down and pursue the life of the mind, tackle tough questions. And I just loved the program on there. They would always have a guest faculty member, sometimes from Franciscan, sometimes from another university. So I really enjoyed that program. And then Dr. John Crosby not John H. Crosby, but the OG.
Yes.
He also had a show at this time on EWTN on the personalism of John Paul II. And I was just blown away by the depth of his knowledge, both the popes, but also Dr. Crosby's, and just really thought, wow, where could I investigate, dive deeply into who I am, what is the nature of human persons, what is it to live in community? And so between Franciscan University Presents and Dr. Crosby's show, I transferred to Franciscan University. Picked up a couple masters after that, one at St. Louis University in historical theology, one in philosophy. Then I ended up in Notre Dame and did my PhD in philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you got your PhD in philosophy, and then what moved you into the field of sort of bioethics? And you've done a lot of work with sort of genetic testing ethics, and then now, and we'll be talking about on the show, transhumanism and sort of the nature of the philosophical issues that come up with that. So what got you down that road?
Pragmatism, not the philosophical school, the lowercase p, being pragmatic. Dr. Crosby would be very disappointed if I was a pragmatist philosopher. I went to Notre Dame and I wanted to study Kant and Kantian ethics and Thomistic natural law. And Notre Dame at the time I was there, 2009, 2015, was a good time. Great Kant scholars there. And you still had a good Thomistic presence in the philosophy department, but also outside the philosophy department, theology with Gene Porter, the Center for Ethics and Culture. And I was just headlong into ethical theory, but I also was married and had 3 kids. And as I began to think about the job market, the academic job market around 2012, 2013, I noticed that there weren't too many jobs for people in academia who specialized in abstract ethical theory. But there were a lot of jobs in applied ethics and bioethics. So the pragmatic side of me, having to provide my family, kind of shifted me towards applied ethics and in particular bioethics.
And you had that started in engineering. So do you have any sort of, actually science and background there that facilitated that too? Or
yes, because at Cal Poly, my major was materials engineering, and the head of the department at the time was really trying to develop a biomedical bend to the program.
Oh, okay.
So thinking about what sorts of materials, and this is kind of apt for today, can enhance and improve persons who might need certain therapies, prosthetic limbs, neural implants, to help correct and mitigate, problems associated with certain diseases or conditions. So there was that sort of very thin, remote link, I think, to the Cal Poly days.
There's a continuity somewhere in that. Yeah, that's great. So, I think we're going to sort of set the stage for the season here and talk a little bit about transhumanism. What is it? And sort of what sort of modern transhumanist thinkers, what their goals are, and who are the major players in this movement. So maybe if you can just start, what is, somebody asks you, what is transhumanism? Well, how would you define that?
I want to call it a movement, but I don't know if it's that well organized to call it a discernible movement. I know the major players in transhumanism want to call it a movement, so we'll use that word loosely. I would say it's an intellectual and even a cultural, arguably a quasi-religious movement that aims to, through the use of human reason and engineering and technological development, to either reverse or stop the aging process and to radically enhance human capacities, either existing capacities like our cognitive or physiological capacities, or even to develop new capacities that we haven't even been able to imagine or would even associate with what it means to be humans. So I'd say that that's sort of a really broad and somewhat nebulous umbrella to kind of capture that movement.
It seems there's a lot of thinkers in this movement, and there's a lot of different technologies that impinge upon this movement. So who would you say are some of the most influential sort of thinkers in this space that are sort of driving sort of that movement forward, right? And helping get resources put into, because like the transhumanism movement, just as an idea, people thought about that for centuries. Can we enhance human nature? But now the technologies are starting to catch up. That requires a lot of resources. So who are the guys or the women that are sort of facilitating getting interest in this field?
So So some people will trace it back to like at least the idea of transhumanism, back to Huxley, I think, who was the first to use the term. Interestingly, there's a translation of
And
Dante.
that would be the
mid 20th century. Yeah. But there's a translation. I forget. It's a Carey's translation of Dante's work, where one of the terms is transhuman. And so, arguably, this idea of the enhancement or becoming greater than what our capacities permit us to be is rooted, I think, in a deep literary tradition, in a philosophical, but also sort of a scientific fictional setting with Huxley. But the contemporary understanding of transhumanism, if I had to trace it, I would say Max Moore may have been the one that coined it in the 80s, when he, and then later his wife, Natasha Vita Moore, developed the Manifesto for Transhumanism. And then there was another book that came out by Ray Kurzweil. I would say that those three are sort of the originators. And if you had to read, like, how did this start? It'd be the work of Moore and Vita Moore and Kurzweil to sort of set the agenda. And I've become fascinated because I work in bioethics, and I'm in a school that's within the health sciences at Pitt, with Aubrey de Grey's work, which is slightly different than the emphasis that you find with, and we'll unpack the reviews a little bit more, I know, with Moore, Vita Moore, and Kurzweil. De Grey focuses more on the physiological, to stop aging altogether, so that you and I, and probably more importantly for him, he can live to the point where we can see realized some of the ideas and conjectures of people like Moore, Vita Moore, and Kurzweil, which would be something that would be sort of a technological and sort of a post-human reality for us.
Yeah, so you have one that's sort of setting the stage to enhance lifespan, reverse aging, that type of thing, so that you can get to the point where the enhancement technologies have developed to the point where you can actually enhance yourself, because we're not there yet with some of these things. I know, like, Kurzweil is one of these guys that thinks that, computing power alone, if you get enough computing power, you're going to get a brain like human, consciousness, right? And as what I think he calls the singularity, right? And then maybe, you can wire your brain to a computer and enhance your cognition, right? And so, but he's been talking about this for a while, right? And where are we in that stage? Because we're not as far along as I think I remember reading a book of his back in the early 2000s.
The Singularity is Near, perhaps, was the book. And he just published, which I have not read yet, The Singularity is Nearer. It's his newest book. So he has revised the timeline a bit because of where we're at with AI currently. He has. And we can get into this a little bit more, because I did describe transhumanism from my perspective as quasi-religious. I know people like Kurzweil, the Moores, de Grey would not think that what they're propagating is religious in that sense, although they do tip their hat to some of the ideas in human enhancement and human capabilities that are found in religious traditions. But they see it as very much a secular movement. But Kurzweil takes information to be something that is sacrosanct. It's something that is written in the very fabric of nature since the Big Bang. And he sees that the cosmos, as it developed from the Big Bang, has been somewhat chaotic, but ordered in a sense that once we had rational beings like you and me and our audience on board, we could read and discover patterns in that nature. And then through our technological progress, sort of marshal the power to manipulate information in such a way that we could achieve some of our most important ends. For people like Kurzweil, one of those most important ends is not to die. He doesn't talk so much about I want to live forever so much as I don't want to die. And you do have specks of that even in the Christian tradition about the fear of death. We tell a story, a true story about the first man and woman fearing death and sinning against God almost to achieve sort of immortality. So I would see Kurzweil's sort of view on information and the progression and evolution of human beings as another retelling of the origin of the cosmos and what we are sort of by nature designed to become, absent God, absent religion, but through our own power. The singularity, as you mentioned, is going to be this decisive point in his view where the powers of artificial intelligence will clearly right? Not arguably, but clearly surpass human intelligence, whether not just computational, which arguably it's there already computationally,
certain
but
tasks.
creatively, in terms of just reasoning, both practical and speculative, we're not there yet. So he has revised his timeline. He thought it was going to be much sooner this decade that we're in currently.
Yeah.
That timeline's been pushed back a bit, but he still believes that he will see this before he dies. He's 76 or 77 years old now, and he thinks within the next 10 to 15 years. He's very hopeful, though, that we will develop therapies and biomedical enhancements that will extend life long enough where he will enjoy seeing
get to
that
that
moment.
point, yeah.
But once we're at the singularity, what he sees is that computational power does not grow linearly, but exponentially. So when AI gets to the point where it surpasses our creative, speculative, and practical reasoning abilities, it will exponentially develop on its own. And we will begin to see ourselves as desiring to be one with this artificial intelligence. That might come by way, according to Kurzweil, of developing neuroprostheses that we can implant in our brains that may enable our conscious thoughts to be interfacing with computer systems, the cloud. He used to early on talk a lot about uploading, so to speak, our consciousness to a computational substrate, sort of denying, and we can get into this later, sort of denying a really strong metaphysical connection between our consciousness and our physiology, our brain, our bodies. And that because he thinks consciousness is the product of neurological patterns, with the assistance of AI, we will be able to identify what those neural patterns are and develop artificial machine substrates for some or all aspects of consciousness. And so that's sort of the future that he envisions. And he kind of optimistically thinks this is all what we all want, because it would be immortality, right? As long as
You got something to
the
do.
substrate exists
Yeah.
and the cloud continues to improve, we will become almost super intelligences, and we'll become less and less reliant for our personal identity, he thinks, and our conscious experience on bodies which decay, break down, and die.
Yeah.
So that is kind of in a nutshell, I think, what he envisions. And he's a true believer in this. There's no guile here. He looks at where technology's gone. He looks at the funding that's being poured in by people with millions and billions of dollars who also want to pursue some sort of safeguard against death. And that's his forecast. Whether it will happen or not is a different story. But that's sort of Kurzweil's view. And I would say that he's sort of taken the reins as the leading transhumanist today.
And he's all about these mind-brain interfaces, I think, because they're going to be interchangeable, because he thinks, in a sense, what's going on in the brain is nothing more than computation.
Right.
And so if you put a chip in there, and we do know to some extent, hey, you can put a retinal chip in and connect to your brain. So there is a way, or cochlear implants, there is a way to connect things to the brain, but he's trying to reduce it entirely. I mean, that's the underlying assumption is that your brain is not, anything special. It's just doing computation. If we can do computation on something else, it'll behave just the same way.
Right. Right. And that's just how information has unfolded and been written into the fabric of nature since the Big Bang. So why would our brains be any different? They're much more complex information substrates. But if we can discover all the patterns that produce consciousness, why couldn't we develop machines or the cloud to undergird and be the substrate, lifting our consciousness away from our body? So there's a dualism here, right? About the nature of the self and consciousness in our bodies.
Right.
That's sort of tacitly and implicitly lurking in this transhumanist view.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's nothing intrinsic about me that houses my consciousness. It's just any computation. So I can take it wherever I want. Right? I mean, does he, it's the thing, I always think about these transhumanists, that idea that, they don't have a way of understanding how consciousness is generated. They just think, well, there's just some computation, and then do they have any sort of humility in recognizing we have no idea why it is, like, Michael, in your brain, these neurons are associated with your conscious experience. It's called the hard problem of consciousness, right?
Exactly, yeah.
We haven't made progress on that. We don't really know that. And so would that give them pause to think, well, just maybe there's something more than computation. There's something immaterial about our consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you got to sit them down here on your program and press them on it, that might emerge and they might have to answer it. But I do think like this is where a lot of really interesting philosophical and appropriately for your show, theological questions arise, because there are a number of assumptions about the nature of consciousness, as you're alluding to. It hasn't been laid bare as to what transhumanists understand consciousness to be. There does seem to be a dualism, but is it a strong metaphysical dualism, or is consciousness just sort of the emerging property out of a purely physicalist, materialist world? So that what we take to be sort of our spiritual conscious selves is sort of an illusion, a la sort of like Daniel Dennett in some of the new atheist movement that was hot about 15 years ago. Or would we get them to acknowledge that, there is this hard problem of consciousness. It's not a problem that's been actually formulated by Christians or people of religion. It's people like David Chalmers, a philosopher at NYU, who wrote an amazing book, The Conscious Mind, where he acknowledges in humility that, we do not understand exactly how consciousness relates to that sort of avocado-colored organ in our heads. Sure, there are associations.
Yeah, right.
And you mentioned that we can do things with retinal enhancement, hearing enhancement with cochlear implants. At Pitt, we're beginning to research deep brain stimulation with implants to help patients with epilepsy. To no longer have seizures, or at least uncontrollable seizures. So absolutely, aspects of our neurology, our brain, impinge upon and impact our conscious experience. But the hard problem of consciousness is just this, that we can completely map the brain, but it looks like there's this altogether other thing, consciousness, what it's like to experience not just sensory information, but reasoning, but also to sort of form the notion of an identity, the I, not an I, but the capital I. This is something that like Dr. Crosby would call the person, the incommunicability of the person. It's that you and I are here talking, we're having a conversation, and we could project your brain up here, where we could get into an MRI and just see what's going on in your brain every time you ask a question, and we can record the various associations. Oh, notice that
this area lit
you
up.
Shift you shift in your chair when that lights up, and you laugh, and this part of your brain.
Right.
And we can do these associations. But what it's like to be Dr. Keeler,
no one wants to know.
No one wants to know. And it looks like that's incommunicable. And that was actually something that I never really appreciated until I came to Franciscan and I studied with Dr. Crosby and Dr. Healy. The idea that there is this deeper sense of self that looks irreducible to the physicality of the brain. I think people like Kurzweil, who are big proponents of transhumanism, are just sort of moving away or around or avoiding that sort of problem. Because, look, the technologies are developing already. We're already developing neural implants that might create brain-computer interfaces. Elon Musk has been a huge proponent of such interfaces for a long time with his company Neuralink. Look, it doesn't matter what the philosophical questions are. We're doing it. But it does matter, because what it's like to be a conscious being and what it's like to be a conscious being without a body or without a brain, well, we don't know what that's like.
Yeah.
And billions of dollars isn't going to solve that problem either.
Yeah, we don't even know if that's possible.
We don't even know if it's possible. Right. Yeah. I have my doubts. And what could it be to be, so my name is Michael. What would it be like to be conscious Michael, but not having a body as the substrate underlying my consciousness, but to have a machine be the substrate of my consciousness? I can't disassociate my conscious experience from my embodiment. So we don't know what that's like. And I again, in humility, I'm not trying to suggest that that the transhumanists are so far off or be flippant about it, but they don't know either.
Right.
And so this is a bit into the unknown. In a very Huxley way, we are moving into the unknown.
No, it's why do you think, what's driving their underlying motivation to this? Because you could argue, well, maybe, is it altruistic? Because you look around, we see suffering, we see death, we see all these things that humans have to deal with, and hey, maybe we can improve upon that, right? Or is it at root pride, just like I, want to be, greater than I am. Right? Yeah. It seems like it could be either or a mix of both. And
Yeah.
as you look at these transhumanists, the leading thinkers, what do you think is motivating them?
Yeah, it's not something I could do looking at the minds and the hearts of true motivation is. I mean, on the surface, much of the rationale is like, look, this can be given an altruistic bent because we all want this. So you ask, is there some sort of base level desire, right, to achieve some of these aims in humans generally? I mean, I will grant that there is. There is a drive for self-preservation, and that will often manifest itself in the way we take care of ourselves. So some people will eat really well, and they'll exercise, and they will pursue longevity, right? They don't want to age too quickly. They want to forestall some of the chronic conditions that are associated with, bad habits.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of that in all of us. And we will even take supplements to sort of enhance certain health capabilities within ourselves. Someone might take creatine to be able to perform a little bit better in the gym, right? We might take omega-3, right, to think more carefully or clearly. Some might be going to pharmaceuticals, which are another sort of therapeutic / enhancement. But just in our everyday life, we often do aim to do things that will either enhance or at least prevent the aging process from sort of overwhelming us. So there is that sort of commonality, I think, within humanity. And you could tap into that, perhaps, if you wanted to justify transhumanism. But transhumanism is much more than taking a supplement, right? Or even taking a sort of pharmaceutical for a therapeutic reason. We also, I think, do have, many of us, an aversion to death. We do think death is a tragedy. We mourn the loss of friends and family. When there's natural disasters or there's wars, famine, we should mourn the death of others, and we pray for others. We pray for restoration of health in others. So there is part of us that has a desire, I think, to move beyond death. And you can again tap into that as a transhumanist and say, look, you deep down desire this too. It might be scary because we're talking about machines and clouds, or we're talking about genetic engineering that can prevent or stop aging. But really, this is just sort of the next level, the next step of that sort of base desire. And that's where I think that there's some continuity with, the human drive to stay alive, to forestall illness and death. We have a story as Christians about why that can be overwhelming to the point where we will do things that perhaps we shouldn't to stave off death or illness. And that's concupiscence as a product of sin. So we have a story to tell about how, all the way back to our first parents in the Garden of Eden, that humans desired some kind of immortality. The question would be, is that immortality achieved by ourselves, either through our willful acts or through the technological imperative and development of substrates to keep us alive forever? Or is it going to be done by someone else, someone higher than us that has a plan? And so there's the divergence. So I kind of started off saying, here's some commonalities. There's a clear divergence in how far we're going to take it. In terms of preventing illness, extending our lives, having, preserving youthfulness as long as we can.
But there's at heart, there is a good drive there, in a sense that we recognize there's something wrong with us. We have limitations or failings, trying to address that. But the way that it's addressed is where the rubber meets the road. Right? So in terms of, you talk about enhancements versus sort of maybe a therapy is trying to help someone, has a cognitive defect, and certain drugs can help them with that. But is that a useful distinction as we're thinking about transhumanism? Hey, you know what? Transhumanism is trying to enhance us, whereas, sort of normal ethical use of technology is just to fix when we have defects, right? Does that work, or is there...
So I have become increasingly skeptical that there's this really neat distinction between therapeutics and enhancements, because I think that bleeds together in a lot of cases. I'm going to steal an example from Alan Buchanan, but it's a personal experience. So I had PRK surgery for my eyes, and so I just had terrible vision from my youth, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And my glasses were, Coke bottles. And so I had PRK, which is, I wasn't a candidate for LASIK. because I have very thin cornea. And I was told when I would have this done is that this would get me to, statistically normal vision. So it was therapeutic in that sense.
Yeah.
It would correct a defect, which I'm comfortable with that word. It was a visual defect that I had. But I ended up getting 2015 vision out of that.
Yeah.
So although it was a therapy, it was also an enhancement if we think about, improving beyond sort of the baseline normal.
Yeah.
And I have family members who have gotten knee replacements and hip replacements, and they will swear to me that while that was a therapeutic measure, where they were at the point where they couldn't even walk, bone on bone, constant pain, that the artificial hip and the knee is better than anything they can remember, even when they were in their 20s.
Okay.
And so those are therapies, but they also have an enhancing effect. And there are certain pharmaceuticals that might be prescribed for people who have certain cognitive illnesses or cognitive disorders. So bipolar medications or ADHD medications that can help bring those individuals to what we might call more normal cognitive processing or social adaptability. But people who are so-called normal cognitively can also take those very same pharmaceuticals and find, wow, my mood is enhanced.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of documentation that taking things like Adderall can temporarily boost your cognitive performance on tests.
Yeah.
I am a caffeine consumer, and I will tell you that that's a mood enhancer for me.
There's nothing therapeutic I need for athletics
too. It's not therapeutic for me. So somebody who might take an amino acid to produce more nitric oxide to better perform athletically. Yeah. Those look more on the enhancement side of things. So I don't know if the therapy enhancement distinction is clear, number one. And number two, I don't know if we can really draw a sharp ethical distinction between right and wrong. Right? Yeah. Therapy is good and right or okay, and then the enhancements. Nicholas Agar, a critic of transhumanism, has a wonderful book called The End of Humanity. A secular philosopher, but just a sharp critic of people like Kurzweil, Aubrey de Grey. He says that while the therapy enhancement distinction looks a little shaky, we can look at enhancements on a spectrum. And clearly, we can delineate some enhancements like caffeine or taking certain pharmaceuticals for cognitive enhancement on one side of the spectrum, and the radical enhancements that are going to develop human capabilities beyond what we've ever imagined or create new capabilities like super intelligence as our consciousness is fused with AI. And he says that's really where we should be focusing our ethical concerns. That appeals to me to some degree. I think that there's, we have a deep virtue ethics tradition where we talk about the intention also forms the species of the act. So taking Adderall therapeutically versus I'm taking Adderall to boost my grade, and maybe that could be, a vicious act. Yeah. That colors, I think, the ethical quality of those actions. But I think Agar's right that we can clearly look at these radical enhancements that people like Kurzweil, the Moores, de Grey are talking about as well beyond the sorts of enhancements that we might think are either permissible or we might feel a little uneasy about them, but really it's hard to nail down what's wrong with them. These are of another caliber. Yeah. And so that helps the radical enhancement versus regular enhancement distinction.
Yeah, so there could be a blurry middle ground, but it's a spectrum. What they're looking at is so far on the other side. Right. It's pretty easy to say, hey, there's something. Yeah, along that line, let's think about like an enhancement and have you sort of give your thoughts on it. So if we could develop a cochlear implant, right, and give it to babies so that they could hear a much wider spectrum of sound throughout their lives, right? So you clearly enhance them beyond sort of normal human enhancement. And you say, well, it's more on the transhumanist end of the spectrum. Is there something inherently wrong with that, right? Does it change the nature of who they are, right? They're still a human, but now they've got this extra capability. Yeah. Putting aside the societal things like, there's some people have good hearing and others won't. Right. Just on the face, is there something that we say that there's something wrong with doing that?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Is it intrinsically wrong, or is there a wrongness that obtains because of certain circumstances? Yeah. So in our contemporary setting with the circumstances that we're in, I think we could have the good intentions with implanting these cochlear implants, right, for infants, not for therapeutic reasons, but to sort of generously fund their ability to hear.
They might survive better because they can sense danger. Whatever.
That would be hypothetical and speculative, exactly, because we would not have the benefit of knowing what this is like.
What's going to do.
So imagine we were doing this tomorrow. I think that there would be something probably vicious about this on a couple fronts. One. It's one thing for you and me in our freedom as adults, as well beyond the age of reason, having lived in this world, having our experiences, being moral agents, but also having that freedom for ourselves to sort of become the human beings that we're supposed to be or want to be. For us to choose something like that to enhance our, audible spectrum, whatever the phrase would be. But for us to sort of impose that upon infants.
Yeah.
Because even if we have really good reasons, or we think we have good reasons, like it'll enhance their life, we think, or they'll hear so many more things that we can't hear. Like the bird songs will be be so much more beautiful, right? And not annoying at 5 a.m. Right?
I want that cochlear implant. I want that.
There is something about taking away their freedom to determine for themselves whether they would want that sort of enhancement, the way that you and I will decide whether we want to take supplements or whether we want to have particular kinds of enhancements to augment our conscious experience of our lives. So there's a freedom element that we're depriving them of. There's also, and I'm going to draw from Michael Sandel a little bit here, but not with a total endorsement of his critique of enhancement, because he's very much an anti-enhancement thinker. I think he raises a lot of good cautionary scenarios with enhancement, particularly of embryos or infants. There is a sense in which we're not accepting those infants for how they are by nature and who they are.
Yeah.
That there's the sort of the giftedness of the person as they come into this world with their various capabilities. And we all have different capabilities. Some of us are faster runners like you than others, taller.
We all have our limitations.
That's
a longer list.
So we might be more impatient, right? But there's that sort of giftedness of the who this is, in addition to what their nature is, that we're sort of imposing upon and invading in a real way. Against the pretext of we're enhancing their lives, we're going to make their life and their experience of the world better. One, we don't know that, so there's that sort of risk that we're taking. That's another ethical concern that we have. But I also worry about the sort of rejection, wholesale, of not just the nature of the individuals, because we're doing this, you said, across the board for all. It's not just simply for therapeutic reasons. Like we might do cochlear implants in somebody who's born deaf, which is also sort of an ethical issue with the deaf community right now as well, right? Whether that counts as mutilation or not, right? So
it's not a straightforward.
Set the disability concerns aside, but here we're sort of tacitly rejecting, I think, what the gift is and who this individual, this person will become, including their freedom to decide for themselves whether they would want to have that great enhancement. I can't even tell you right now that I would want that enhancement if you offered it to me. So why would I impose that upon the infant? So there's those three sort of ethical concerns that I would raise.
No, that's a good.
Unless we lived in like a hypothetical world where some disaster happened where 85 or 90% of the things that we would normally be able to detect audibly are now absent from the planet, and this cochlear implant would, with good reason and probability, enable them to live in that world and thrive in that world. Maybe then we could redo the ethical analysis a bit. Doesn't mean we're going to get a different answer. But at the very least, right, that's a sort of hypothetical scenario. But right now, in reality, I would say, I would have a number of ethical concerns about doing that. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it does on the surface sound like it's altruistic and it's a generous offering to them. And we do. You're a parent. I'm a parent. I have 5 living children. I mean, we want the best for them. We put them in certain schools on purpose. We sit with them and read to them. They get things that many kids don't. I used to teach in Terre Haute, Indiana, and there were many kids there who didn't have parents at home to read to them. And so there was that sort of enhancement, so to speak, of my children's cognitive abilities that other children didn't enjoy. But I'm sort of working with a developing capacity that they currently have.
You're working with their nature.
And their nature. I'm not imposing upon them a device a physiological intervention or a cognitive intervention because I think, but I don't know that it'll be good for them. But I do know what will be good for them because I know what human nature is, how it develops, and what capabilities go into making it, at least a minimally decent life.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up human nature because I think that hits upon the core difference between sort of a Christian approach to this stuff and a secular approach to this stuff. And this idea that we have access to technology and that we can use that technology to radically change anything about us, versus we have a nature, we have something that we're here for. There's a givenness, as you were saying, to our bodies, to who we are, and that givenness gives certain ethical, sort of, moral imperatives that we have. But there's if you reject that givenness, our nature is nothing. It's just whatever we can do to it is good, right? So any modification inherently is not good or bad. It is, right? So let's just start messing with this, like we're tinkering with a car, in a sense. That does seem to be at the heart of it. It's a different understanding of the human person, right?
That's right. Yeah. I think that there are a couple axes that this turns on when the difference between our understanding of human nature and sort of the transhumanist picture of human nature. Just on the ethical theory side, a lot of the debate about human enhancement, whether it's regular enhancements or these sort of radical enhancements of the transhumanists, is just turning on questions of can we or not. So the sort of the permissibility or impermissibility of it. This is not exclusively a Christian perspective, but there's a certain poverty in that ethical analysis because it doesn't consider just what grounds our understanding of what's right and wrong, and isn't there more to ethics than just simply what's my duty or what should I not do? So the oughts and the ought nots. What is it to flourish as a human? What is it to develop virtue? What is it to seek to become, to borrow from Kierkegaard, the sort of self I want to be or the sort of self that I should be? In a lot of contemporary ethics, and I will, in my own formation, in the analytic philosophical tradition, I acknowledge its poverty, but many of my colleagues do too, of just reducing the ethics to just the ought or the ought not. I think a lot of the transhumanist debate is trading on that. And then we can just say, well, what's really wrong with this? And then we can kind of skirt around these questions about consciousness that we discussed earlier and human nature. But one important ethical consideration that I don't think you need to be a Christian to embrace, in fact, I'm going to borrow it from somebody who I don't think is a Christian, a philosopher at the University of Ottawa, Christine Straley. She has this wonderful phrase that vulnerability is a background condition of human living. Vulnerability is sort of a constitutive feature of what it is to be human. And the transhumanist movement largely looks like it's trying to evade or conquer that vulnerability. Vulnerability to what? Vulnerability to being harmed emotionally, spiritually, but also physiologically. All of us are moving in our lives between, again, to borrow a friend, Joel Michael Reynolds from Georgetown, another secular philosopher, transability. We move through our lives from ability to disability, right?
That's true.
Creaky knees, injury, illness.
Memory,
right. And that sort of vulnerability sort of grounds our dependence on one another. Now I'll go to a Catholic philosopher, Alistair MacIntyre. He called us dependent rational animals. That what it really is to be human is to understand that the vulnerability generates this relation of dependence on one another as infants and children to our families, as adults, and even as adolescents to friendships, spouses, even those who become priests, like Father Dave here, have a community. And that's born out in large part to our dependence, our mutual dependence on one another, and recognizing that dependence generates obligations of care. And what it is to be sort of a virtuous member of a community is not to say, well, I'm going to support you or care for you because I ought to do it or I have to. But we become the sorts of people who embrace the vulnerability that each one of us has. And we respond out of a givenness, I'm not trying to be platitudinous, out of a love for one another that is born deeply in understanding who we are, what our abilities are, but also our vulnerabilities, our limitations. And I think a lot of our relationships, our human relationships, are born out of our vulnerability. What would it be for you or for me or for any of us to not be vulnerable to illness, injury, death, to not need anyone, to have a purely machine or computational substrate for our consciousness?
Or psychological harm, not vulnerable to depression and all these things. We are radically dependent upon other people and our environment for all of these things,
who we
are,
and our very identity.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that the transhumanist idea here is completely hubris, but there's a sense in which there is a sort of a categorical rejection of what I take to be, and I'm not alone in thinking this, of what really is constitutive of what it is to be a human.
Yeah.
And that is in large part to be in relations of dependence and community.
Yeah.
And this looks like the transhumanist movement obliterates that,
Yeah.
chasing after. And this goes back to one of your early questions, what's the motives? I don't want to give motives, but it does look like it's very much in the vein of an individualistic
radical autonomy
and radical autonomy. That autonomy to be free, to be self-determining, requires the rejection of a fundamental constitutive aspect of my very existence, my being in this world.
Yeah.
And that's weird.
No, that is.
Yeah.
It's really, I've never, drawing that parallel there, because it's almost a natural outcrop of sort of the radical autonomy that's creeped into society, that I construct my own reality, I construct my own moral values, I construct my own way of seeing the world, I make my own self. Yeah. And this is taking technology and going even further than that. I'm going to make my own self physically and technologically, and it's extending that sort of radical autonomy that we already see sort of fragmenting society. So it gives you pause to think, okay, is this actually a good thing to further this? And this is what gives me concern, is that there's a lot of good uses of these technology, like cochlear implants, but using that and developing that technology is like a step to get to the next step on the transhumanist thing. Or, genetically engineering adult cells to put back into your bone marrow. And it's a great, they're able to do that to address certain blood disorders, right, in an ethical way. But that technology is stepping the stage for doing other genetic modifications, of embryos. And we're going to insert these genes into all the embryos because that's going to reduce disease, right? And so, the technology, that we're developing for certain things that seem to be, helping us flourish, or could help us flourish, right, are the same technologies that are going to be used against us to basically radically alter our nature. And as you said, we don't really know what those are going to do, right? And that's that seems to be one of the biggest concerns I have seen, how this moves forward. So you mentioned at the beginning, I just want to wrap up with this. You talked about how you see it as a sort of a religious undertone, and quote unquote, because like Kurzweil's not going to say he's religious at all, but there's sort of a religious imperative to some of these transhumanists, almost like that. And is that just because everybody needs something like that in their lives if they reject traditional religion, or what's your take on that? It's a religious imperative that you see there.
I'm not a psychologist, but so anecdotally, I'm with a lot of people who are not religious, and we have great conversations about these deep philosophical questions about human nature, human aspirations, and whatnot. So again, and this does not constitute psychological advice, but it does look like there is a longing deeply implanted within us for overcoming the limitations of our bodies and to live in eternity. And I think that while the transhumanists won't use the sort of religious language of eternity or the deep longing, I think it is tacitly assumed by that project. And so there's one sense in which there's nothing new under the sun, right? Since the ancient Greeks, or even the ancient cultures of Mesopotamia, right, there's stories about the desire of humans to become more, right? We have Prometheus, Icarus. I mean, we have the attempts through our own ingenuity to go beyond.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that the root desire there is not a bad desire. But this is where I do see a separation, and I'll because I'm a Catholic, I'll say between Christianity and transhumanism here, is that the commonality kind of begins and ends there, that there is a truth to becoming our true selves by overcoming death and the limitations of these bodies. But the question is, how does that happen? On the transhumanist side, we will become immortal despite our bodies by sort of eliminating their vulnerabilities or just eliminating them altogether. For Christians, we become immortal not through any of our own effort, but through the grace of Jesus Christ, for whom we have been destined to be with from the moment of our creation. And we are saved as Christians through and with our bodies. And so this is a really deep, I don't want to say it creates a contradiction, but it's a really deep divide between these two sort of worldviews of what humans are and what our destiny is. That as Christians, we do not see the body as something that needs to be overcome through our effort or to be rejected or cast aside.
The limit that's holding us down.
We know the effects of sin, though. Death, illness. But death then becomes our pathway to liberation through Jesus Christ. And we have a God who, if you don't want to be convinced intellectually, at least to borrow a phrase from Regis Martin, a God who doesn't let us suffer alone, who has experienced the hell of human hopelessness, as he puts it, who's gone through death ahead of us and with us. And through that experience, we too shall be saved, despite the limitations of our bodies. So I really see that as a huge departure then, and a huge difference from sort of the Judeo-Christian view of the body, the soul, human nature, but also the path to immortality. So it's great that we can recognize that all humans have this sort of tacit longing, even if they can't articulate what it is. But it is, I think, to prepare us to receive the grace of salvation. Whereas the threat of pride, the specter of pride, which goes all the way back to our first parents, will co-opt that desire and tempt us to think that we can achieve it by our own measures, on our own time, on our own scale. And in that sense, I don't want to say it's completely antithetical, but it's pretty far off from the sort of Christian worldview that you and I espouse.
Of what our ultimate destiny is, and how do we achieve that ultimate destiny.
But it's also that rejection of vulnerability in human nature and dependence, which is not a uniquely Christian idea. So it's not just that it's either Christianity or this. It's like, no, you're rejecting wholesale a whole idea and a whole ethos, right, of thinking about what it is to be human.
No, that's great. That's a great place to end here, because I think you set it up, this topic, and for us to explore some of the next few episodes of transhumanism and sort of the deep philosophical and theological issues that are at play. So really appreciate your insights, Michael. And thanks for joining us.
That was awesome. Thank you. Yeah.